Thank you. Well, not so new, given that you've already heard the whole story here in the first two talks. But I think we're observing a trend here, and that's what's encouraging. This is my financial disclosures, and specifically the ARC scan, of course, which is FDA approved and available in Europe and in China, actually. So I don't have to tell you about the risks of ICL are mostly to do with sizing, and that the undersizing with the hole is not a guarantee of not having some anterior subcapsular changes. But the essence of what you're hearing this morning and seeing is that for too long we've been using a measurement to determine the ICL size that is not a direct measurement. We've been using the size of the hands to pick the size of the shoes, which is, you have size 8 hands, you probably have size 9 feet, 90% of the time is going to be fine. But you see, the sulcus, which used to be the standard, can be the same as the angle to angle. The sulcus can be larger than the angle to the angle. The sulcus can be smaller than the angle to the angle. And there can be cysts in the wrong place. So this mystery as to why we've had ICL sizing problems would have been solved 25 years ago when ultrasound, higher frequency ultrasound was becoming commercially available, but for some reason it hasn't. And it's amazing that we're in 2024 and we finally have 3 speakers saying exactly the same thing. So maybe we're gonna finally see some change. My approach is very much, as you've observed, to do the best preoperative determination as possible, to use the best intraoperative measurements and statistics as possible, and then to use the best post-op monitoring as possible. So if we look at pre-op determination and we quickly look through the history, it's basically white to white, but then Lovisolo and Doherty stuck the sulcus to sulcus into the literature. And then Kojima said, well, the lens rise matters, so we'll use the sulcus to sulcus, but we'll add the lens rise. And we were using Kojima's formula with much higher frequency ultrasound, expecting better results. What we found was that there were actually different parameters that we had never seen published or even talked about before that were more predictive of the lens size than the sulcus to sulcus. And that is this thing which we measured called the ciliary body inner diameter. And it was a randomly selected measurement. We made lots of measurements, did a multivariate regression analysis, and found that the CIBD, together with the sulcus to sulcus lens rise, together with the pre-op scotopic pupil, gave us a really good predictability of what ICL to put in. And note that we were not able to even get the sulcus to sulcus into the formula anymore. That's how strong the CIBD is that it can't coexist in the same formula as the sulcus to sulcus. So we now have CIBD effectively surpassing the use of sulcus to sulcus. So we were using this quite happily, and rather than just recommending a lens size, we said, well, based on the teachings from Saldivar, let's pick the right lens based on angle changes and age and anterior chamber depth. Of course, OCTs have come into the fold, and Kojima, the NK formula, NK2, now NK3. AI is starting to be used. The Russo formula is now integrated into the MS39, super easy to use. And so we now have a lot more things to play with. Anterior segment OCT, however, again, is not looking behind the iris. And so it's the outliers that we're finding, and you showed me some great cases just now, and that's the point. I mean, vast majority of cases are fine with a white to white. Not ideal necessarily, but fine. I heard Roberto say once that the percentage, he's put 25,000 ICLs in, the percentage of eyes, he said, that are not ideal the way I'd want them to be is 30%. That was his quote. Not the exchange rate. So we developed our model. We had a 42 initial training set. We then did another training set with 69 eyes. And just to compare apples and pears and oranges, we we back calculated the ICL volt that the other formulas would give in order to make a comparison. So in our study, this is our training set, and you can see that the interquartile range was 391 microns, and the full range was 810 microns of the post-op volt, around 500 microns. Here's our first formula, here's our second, and we just combine formula 1 and 2 for numbers, and we see that compared to all of the other formulas, the NK2, the Iragashi, which are OCT-based, Kojima, ultrasound biomicroscopy, and of course the white-to-white from STAR, and we see that actually we get the very best tight control of predictability by looking behind the iris. Now that's obviously, it's obvious, but, I mean, it's obvious when you say it, but somehow it doesn't seem to catch on. When we compare what lens would have been chosen by other formulas to the lens that would have been chosen by CIBD, we find, here's your summary, but we find that, for example, 17% of the OCOS website suggestions are 2 sizes too large compared to what we would have chosen by looking behind the iris. And Roger showed us some very beautiful cases. Here's another one. So we look at this case, we put it into our ICLsizing.com formula, we decide that we're going to put a 12.6 in, and what do we get? Instead of getting about 560, we get 820. Okay, so that's what we got. So basically we got about 250 more than we expected with the CIBD. If we had put in what was recommended by STAR, we would have had, instead of 1,000, we would have had, you know, about 1,350. So this goes from being a case where it's okay to being not okay. And that's because we're looking behind the iris. So when we look at the attempted versus achieved volt, Formula 1, and as you can see, Formula 2, much more on the equality line, and we look at the predictability of each of these formulas, we found that we could get 61% of the eyes within 100 microns of predicted volt, 96% within 300 microns of predicted. Now, of course, OCT is better than white-to-white, but ciliary body inner diameter is much better, and it's not a debate. It's obvious. Okay, it's obvious. So we put in a website where you can enter all the parameters, or just the 3 that you need for the so-called Reinstein formula, but you can put all of them in, and it will give you all of the formulas, and you can compare them, a little bit like the ESCRS site. Now, the posterior chamber is the deal. And so the way I'd like to grade this in terms of the ICL sizing Olympics is that you get a bronze medal if you're using white-to-white. You're not doing a lot of cases, you probably won't have much problems. But if you want that scatter to go down, you need to use a much more sophisticated measure than just white-to-white. But if you really want to find those outliers and get rid of them, you have to look behind the iris. You cannot find them in front of the iris because the lens is going behind the iris. So that's the chamber that determines if it's too high or too low. So if you look directly behind the iris, you will find the eyes where it was going to go too high or too low. I don't know, it sounds like I'm explaining this over and over again, but for some reason, it doesn't seem to stick. Now, the question as to whether you can use handheld ultrasound biomicroscopy, as we're seeing, for us, we have one data point. Now, Dr. Izbecka, professor in the Medical University of Warsaw, she used our online formula using the Quantel from the UBM from Quantel. And what she got was 61%, sorry, we got 61%, she got 39% within 100 and 85% within 300. So obviously resolution matters, and so if you've got higher resolution, you're going to be better at detecting the ciliary body inner diameter. Now, what's interesting about the Guru is that because it's using both ultrasound and OCT, and you don't even know what it's doing because it's doing a 3-dimensional analysis, and probably nobody knows what it's doing because it's AI. So it's somehow managing to combine these elements and give us information that perhaps is obviating the need to have higher frequency ultrasound than lower frequency ultrasound. Finally, it's the intra-op measurement, and Sri showed these cases. My son presented this at the Academy, at this meeting last year, measuring the volt intraoperatively and being able to adjust the haptics based on the position or the tilt of the lens actually is helpful. So he looked at the intraoperative volt measurement versus the post-op and found a loose correlation, but on average 200 microns less at 1 month than intra-op. So what we did was we did a multivariate regression analysis, and we found a way of predicting what the volt would be at 1 month based on the intraoperative measurement using more than just a univariate analysis. And this model, with a prospective testing set, was able to detect 100% of the volts within 320 microns of what we thought. So now we have a way intraoperatively of deciding how to do whether we should do an exchange or not, because sometimes these high volts come right down. But in this case, there was a 68% chance that it was going to stay above 900 by the model, and so I exchanged it. Post-op monitoring, well, this is what it looks like in my clinic at 1 month. We predict 507, we got 510. We predict 663, we get 555. We predict 408, we get 518. We predict 467, we get 407. It's like Christmas every day. But Roberto explained very clearly, pointed out that the volt in the middle in a high myopic lens is not the most important measurement. It's actually behind the iris. So how are you going to measure that? You're going to dilate the pupil and then measure it? No, you can't do that, because you dilate the pupil, the lens goes forward. So you have to measure it with ultrasound. And like I said, the position of these foot plates can affect the volt by 200 microns. So if you can map the volt behind the iris postoperatively, now you have a way of determining whether something's too close or what in terms of long-term safety in a younger patient. So in conclusion, highly accurate pre-op determination, biological factors lead to some variability, which you can then catch intraoperatively, so you don't have to send the patient out of the operating room and then bring them in. You can fix it on the table with a predictive formula, and finally post-op monitoring to make sure that the long-term safety is assured. ICLsizing.com, thank you very much. No financial, you don't pay for it, you just use it free.
Congratulations.